When it comes to the question of the whether fasted training is bad for muscle growth and strength, the conversation has been shaped as much by internet myths as by actual science. So let's dive into what the research really says. To begin with, Vera et al. 2025 published as a randomized clinical trial directly compared 12 weeks of resistance training performed in a fasted state versus a fed state in 28 young adults. One group trained after a 10 to 12-hour overnight fast, while the other group consumed a carbohydrate rich meal and trained 1 to 2 hours later. Both groups trained twice a week, and the findings were interesting. Both fasted and fed participants saw improvements in muscle thickness, 1 rep max strength on the bench press and knee extension, as well as gains in lower body power. Surprisingly, the fasted group even showed a slightly greater increase in fat free mass. Although the researchers noted this was likely due to greater overall body weight gain rather than a magical fasted training advantage. So, the takeaway from Vera and colleagues is clear. Training in a fasted state is not inherently harmful for muscle or strength development over the course of a standard resistance program. Another fascinating line of research comes from Tricky et al. 2023 and 2024, who investigated training during the month of Ramadan, which represents a particularly restrictive form of fasting since participants abstain from both food and water from dawn to sunset. Their studies looked at whether training before or after breaking the fast produced different outcomes in body composition, strength, hormone, and even sleep. They assessed body composition using bioelectrical impedance analysis, strength with squat, bench press, and deadlift 1 rep maxes. Well, that makes me happy. And sleep with Pittsburgh Sleep Quality Index. Results showed that both groups, whether training fasted or fed, lost body weight and fat while maintaining lean mass. However, squat and deadlift strength improved in the fed group only during Ramadan, with gains of around 5 kilos in the squat and 9 in the deadlift. After Ramadan ended, both groups' lifts improved, but the fed group still outperformed the fasted one, showing around 4 kilos more in the squat and 10 kilos more in the deadlift. Hormonal responses included an expected increases in cortisol across both groups, which normalized after Ramadan, while the fed group also experienced an increase in testosterone, though the researchers suggested this likely did not make a major difference of hypertrophy at all. The critical point here is that under extreme fasting conditions such as Ramadan, fed training appears to give athletes a performance edge, especially in strength lifts. Shifting to a broader perspective, Longo and Panda and colleagues have been cited in the review Intermittent Fasting, Eating by the Clock for Health and Exercise Performance, published in BMJ Open Sport and Exercise Medicine, which discusses the circadian rhythm component of time-restricted eating. This review emphasizes that aligning food intake with circadian biology, such as avoiding late-night meals, improves insulin sensitivity and reduces systemic inflammation. And importantly, short-term trials showed that strength and muscle gains are not impaired when intermittent fasting protocols are paired with adequate protein intake and hydration. Similarly, the narrative review by Tinsley LaBounty 2023 in Science Direct titled A Narrative Review of Intermittent Fasting with Exercise points out that combining intermittent fasting with structured exercise consistently reduces fat mass, while lean mass can be preserved, provided that resistance training and protein intake are adequate. They noted that improvements in insulin sensitivity and cardiovascular markers are possible, although the results across studies are somewhat mixed. Still, training adaptations such as strength, endurance, and VO2 max were not impaired and in some cases improved. Expanding further, a comprehensive review in the journal Current Insights titled Exercise Training and Fasting Current Insights consolidates evidence that fasted training reliably increases fat oxidation and may enhance metabolic flexibility by promoting mitochondrial biogenesis. Though it also notes that high-intensity performance can be compromised if carbohydrate availability is chronically low. The review highlights hormonal shifts like elevated catecholamines and growth hormones during fasting, which may support fat mobilization and muscle preservation, though these effects are more acute than long-term anabolic. One of the most rigorous pieces of evidence comes from the systemic review and meta-analysis by Hackett et al. 2021, published in Science Direct, which pooled 28 randomized control trials, including over 300 healthy adults, directly comparing fasted versus fed exercise in acute bouts. Their analysis showed that fasted exercise produced higher post-exercise glucose and insulin levels and greater reduction in free fatty acids, but no significant differences in triglycerides or respiratory exchange ratio. Mechanistically, they suggested that fasted training activates AMP, activated protein kinase, and GLUT4 translocation, which may improve glucose uptake. However, the key finding was that while fat oxidation increased during fasted exercise, this did not necessarily translate to superior long-term fat loss unless paired with a caloric deficit. Complementing this, Anton et al. 2021 in their review, Intermittent Fasting and Exercise Performance, published in Nature Reviews Endocrinology, looked at the effects of prolonged fast and intermittent fasting protocols on exercise capacity. They reported that intermittent fasting protocols like time-restricted eating and alternate day fasting did not impair resistance training outcomes when protein intake was adequate. But 7-day water fast, while tolerated, led to temporary reduction in high-intensity performance. Interestingly, they also noted that intermittent fasting may reduce systemic inflammation, improve circadian rhythm alignment, and be a viable strategy for athletes seeking weight control without compromising adaptation. Another study, the effects of 24-hour fasting on exercise performance and metabolic response in female athletes, published in the journal Frontiers in Physiology, focused specifically on women and showed that a single day of fasting reduced short-term performance markers but did not blunt metabolic adaptation or recovery when refeeding followed. This points to an important nuance. Acute fasting may hinder same-day high-intensity performance, but over weeks and months, adaptation in muscle strength and hypertrophy can still occur normally. Taken together, what do all these studies and reviews mean for the average lifter or athlete? Well, across randomized trials, meta-analysis, and narrative reviews, the consensus is that fasted training is not inherently detrimental to muscle growth or strength as long as overall nutrition, especially protein intake and hydration, is adequate. Where fasted training does have an edge is in metabolic flexibility and fat oxidation, making it useful for athletes or individuals prioritizing body composition, endurance, or metabolic health. However, the trade-off is that peak performance in strength and high-intensity efforts can take a hit in a fasted state, especially under more extreme fasting conditions like Ramadan or multi-day fasts. For most people, the practical advice is this: if training fasted feels comfortable for your lifestyle and you still meet your daily nutrition needs, you're not sabotaging your gains. On the other hand, if your goal is to maximize 1 rep max strength or high power output, especially in a sports performance, having some pre-training fuel, whether that's a full meal or even just a piece of fruit or sports drink, may give you a noticeable edge. So is fasted training bad for muscle growth and strength? The evidence says no, it's not bad. It's just situational. It can be a powerful tool for fat loss and metabolic health, but not necessarily the best strategy if your number one priority is maximal strength performance. Thank you.